The Timeline is a Blue Wire podcast. Welcome to the Timeline, a Phoenix Suns podcast. My name is Mike. I'm here with Sam. Sam, how you doing?
I'm doing well. We have news.
Yeah,
A new
wait
chapter.
till midweek. It's still working. Waiting till midweek. It's still working. We get news every time we record midweek. Nothing comes out on the weekends during this
Tuesday morning or so. We kind of think, shit, what are we going to talk about this week? And then bang, there it is. Right when we need it.
Yep. Enough happening this week. We got a lot to talk about. I'm in Colorado. I'm out of town, sitting in a hotel room, excited to talk about the Phoenix Suns still. I brought my stuff, and I was thinking, well, I have this here. We'll record if we need to. And if something breaks, we'll definitely record. I'll be ready. But yeah, we definitely have stuff to talk about. Let's get right into it. We finally heard about the rumored meeting between Kevin Durant and the owner of the Brooklyn Nets, who is named Joe Tsai. It was reported, interestingly, by Sham that Kevin Durant reiterated his trade request to Joe Tsai and followed it up that if you want me to stay, you have to fire Sean Marks and Steve Nash, leaving, I guess, technically in some sense, the window open for Kevin Durant to stay with the Brooklyn Nets. And I think there is a lot of interesting things about that initial report, which also, by the way, included a mention of every team that could trade for Kevin Durant, except the Phoenix Suns in that report as well. But what did you think when that report came out, Sam?
Initial reaction to this report, obviously, was that it looked like good news, or at least fairly good news, from the Suns side, and then turned out to be even better news later on based on other updates that came out. We'll get to that in just a second. But you remember when we were talking about this last week, it kind of, the conversation we had was that it was wide open and that maybe there would be this path to reconciliation between KD and the Nets. Obviously, at the time, that's what Nets fans were hoping for, whereas Suns fans were hoping for KD to put his foot down. Just based on the initial report, I think Suns fans got 70-80% of what we were asking for, because there was still this path to potential reconciliation between KD and the Nets. It just didn't feel very likely that they were actually going to go through. You know what I mean? With firing both Steve Nash and Sean Marks is a pretty tall task. And then, you know, after that, obviously that sort of 70 or 80% good news turned more, in my opinion, into kind of 95 or 100% based on once the ball was back in Joe Tsai's court. But that's another point entirely if you want to hold off on that for a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I'll be honest, just from my initial reaction, I just didn't believe that. The ultimatum, the idea of Kevin Durant saying, oh, I'll stay if you fire the coach and the general manager. If he did say that, which it's possible that he actually did say that, I don't think it was with the intention of staying. I think there is the idea of sort of almost like the Nets have some sort of out on this, where they could say we didn't want to blow up our front office, we didn't want to fire our coach, we didn't want to bend the knee to a player and sort of do everything and acquiesce to everything that he's asking us for and blow up our team as a result, or at least the front office, who of course the owners work with the most. I kind of felt like it gives the Nets an out to trade Kevin Durant for less than what people initially anticipated, because now they can say we were limited with our options because we didn't want to acquiesce to him, so we traded him for the best package we can get. Now we don't have to go into the season with, you know, Kevin Durant on the team and Sean Marks and Nash on the team, because to me, because what came out next, which you alluded to, was Joe Tsai, like 4 or 5, 6 hours later or something, tweeted out that he fully supported Sean Marks and Steve Nash, which of course is not always the case when owners say that kind of thing, but I felt like this was a pretty pointed statement in support of him and in support of both of them. But the way I view it now is the threats that the Nets have sort of let out of forcing Kevin Durant to show up and play. I understand why. I understand from a negotiating perspective to try and get the most possible. Maybe Kevin Durant changes his mind. Not necessarily about staying with the Nets, but maybe all of a sudden, a few months being miserable with the Nets, maybe now he's willing to go to the Celtics or somewhere like that where they can say, now we can get more because the teams that he's willing to play for has now opened up because the possibilities have changed. I just don't see how the Nets could possibly bring Kevin Durant into the season after the demand was reported. Because now, if you have Sean Marks and Steve Nash, well, now you have a player on the team that explicitly said through the media, supposedly, that he doesn't want to be around them. And if you fire both of them, now you're acquiescing to Kevin Durant, and there's no guarantee that he's going to be happy beyond that if you fire both of them.
Right.
So to me, those threats now, I just view all of those threats in a different light. How could they do it? I don't see how it's possible.
And that's sort of the other reason that I say that this is 80% good news for Suns fans based on what we wanted to hear the entire time, because he's basically now come out and said he doesn't want to play for this organization through whatever coded messaging. He hasn't gone all the way to one end of the spectrum and said, put me on the Phoenix Suns. There is only one team I will play for, and they are the Phoenix Suns. That's kind of what...
Do you know why? Do you think I mean, like, do you have any theories as to why he hasn't done that explicitly?
I mean, I don't necessarily believe that the Suns are the only organization that he would be. I think KD's ring chasing. I think there's a world where he'd be okay playing for the Boston Celtics. I think maybe there's a world where he'd be even okay playing for the Toronto Raptors. I definitely do. I do believe
kind of a weirdo, though.
I do believe that the Suns are at the top of the list. But my point just being, he has not gone all the way. He has done a lot of the work in now eliminating the Nets' leverage, so that they do kind of have to get rid of him, although they might still test him on whether or not he really wants to put his foot down and not show up to training camp, because that is an option that is now on the table as well. If this lasts, up until September or October. But I will say, I think this was your initial reaction actually to the report, that you would not be surprised if a trade now happened pretty quickly. That was kind of your 15 minutes after it breaks analysis.
Right.
Do you still feel that way right now? Like things are moving rapidly here, and we could get some closure. We could have some finality here within a week or two. Well,
I guess the reason I viewed that is well, let me first say, I think the reason Kevin Durant is not going to, and I think he's not going to, is explicitly state that he wants to play for the Phoenix Suns is because of the possibility of tampering in that case. I don't think that they want to make it clear that there were any back channel things, which, by the way, are clearly happening. Like, there's no doubt that they're happening. But if he starts to get out there and explicitly say things like that, which no player, from my knowledge, no player has ever done, at least in the modern era, I think that there's a chance that there could be some sort of tampering charges levied against them, at least by other owners, mainly some with the initials JT for the Brooklyn Nets. But beyond that, my initial reaction, the reason I sort of thought that it could happen soon, is because, one, the Nets know what's out there for him, right? They know the offers for Kevin Durant right now, and they know how those offers are probably impacted by his willingness to play for different teams or whoever it is. But also beyond that, my reaction, which I just outlined a second ago, was I just don't see how they bring him back. Now, of course, people have mentioned the possibility of him coming back to the Brooklyn Nets even after that, with Hollinger writing about it for The Athletic, or Christian Winfield, who writes for the, I think, New York Daily News, reported that this was, and by the way, this came out, I would call it auspicious timing at the very least. He reported that Kevin Durant wouldn't necessarily show up at camp just because he likes basketball, which, by the way, the reporting on Kevin Durant has been Kevin Durant just loves to hoop. Of course he'll show up at training camp and he'll play for the season, even though they didn't trade him. And, of course, that report comes out, pretty quickly after the rest of the reporting that has happened regarding Kevin Durant. So I think that I processed it through the lens of they know what's out there. They're clearly not going to bring him back because they're not going to actually fire Marks and Nash, which, by the way, they still technically could.
I mean, there were a lot. Let's just put it out there that there were a lot of people, even on the Nets side, saying, "Yeah, if that's what he wants, then let's fire them," which I think is kind of funny. And for the record, I would not have done. But just to point out that maybe Joe Tsai shouldn't have gone out and literally tweeted and destroyed their leverage and said, we're going to back this side up.
It's really like it's a classic new owner move.
But you know what? Like, can you really blame him? Like, what would you have done in the situation? It is as
you could just leak it to the media. You know, like you don't have to actually say it.
I know. You don't have to actually say it, but it is as close. You understand what I'm saying when I say it's as close to a lose-lose situation as it gets. You can't look weak to the other owners. I get it. Right. Like, you can't look like the player is in the driver's seat of the organization, especially a player who just got swept in the playoffs and is 34 years old, yada, yada, yada. But yeah, shouldn't have. Wrong communication channel to do it for sure.
It's so funny.
And now their only move is leaking packages. Like you said, the Nets know exactly what's out there from every single team. The only leverage they have left is to continue to have Sean Marks leak packages to Woj about this team offered this, whether or not it was 1 day ago or 6 weeks ago, and have the same 4 or 5 teams be in constant competition with each other. So that's the only move they have left.
Which, by the way, other teams are supposedly angry about that, right? They are tired of the fact that they feel like they're negotiating with the media instead of just the Brooklyn Nets. And I think you're right. Yeah, it's just unfair. It's creating turmoil. We know that it's created turmoil for the Boston Celtics right now. We are 100% certain of that. And any other team where anything else comes out, I think a similar thing could happen. And that's, I think, where they're at. And I think you're right. I think processing a bit from the perspective of just the Suns, and of course, every podcast we've done for the last, it's been since June 30th, by the way. If it feels like it's been a year, it's been about a month and a week or
it's so. 2 months. That's 2 months.
Yeah.
It's been a long time, though. Yeah.
It's been a while. It feels like forever. Every podcast we've done, like I said, we're starting with a segment on Kevin Durant to just update the situation. By the way, can I just, I'm going to sidetrack us for a second here. Covering Kevin Durant, we have sort of gotten a taste of what it's, you and I have gotten a taste of what it's like to cover Kevin Durant. This is a guy who left the OKC Thunder to go to the Golden State Warriors in one of the maybe the most heavily criticized move of all time outside of maybe LeBron. Then he leaves what could be a dynasty in Golden State to create his own team in Brooklyn. And then in Brooklyn, everything goes badly. They win one playoff series. He is now forcing his way off Brooklyn, supposedly asked for the general manager and the coach to be fired. And then we sit here on the podcast every week and we have conversations about how we think he feels personally about every single thing that happens. And I realize that with Kevin Durant comes just an outsized amount of speculation and theatrics and drama, and sometimes he's involved in them with his tweets and sometimes he's not. But like, because of how mercurial he is, there's this weird aspect to covering Kevin Durant, which we have now gotten a taste of, which is if he's traded to the Suns. Do you think that we're prepared to do this every week on Kevin Durant? Like, do we have to have a segment talking about how he feels on a week-to-week basis?
Let me just say, I definitely don't want to become the theatrics pod. If Kevin Durant comes to the Suns, I've said this before, it's because he is on a mercenary mission to win us a ring. I don't think there's any necessary love between Suns fans and Kevin Durant because they understand the type of devastation that he can cause an organization like he's doing to the Brooklyn Nets right now. You know, so it's not really something out of love, no matter how he may feel about Devin Booker, Monty Williams, or whoever else in the Suns organization right now. It's just we feel that this is our best way to maximize opportunities to win a championship, and that's really all there is to it. But exactly what you're talking about, the theatrics, the drama, this is why there is a minority, and they are a minority, but they're a vocal minority of Suns fans who probably are very sick of us talking about this every week because their opinion has remained unchanged, that they do not want any part of this whole Kevin Durant story, that they would rather just, I don't know, either run it back with complete continuity or go after another guy who's going to be less of a hassle because they just don't want to deal with it. And, you know, to an extent, I understand that and I respect that. It's just, for me, if you have to blow up the entire franchise a year or two from now, so be it. At least I would be able to sleep well at night that this was the move that put you in the best position to win a championship. And right now, with where the Suns are, that's really all that matters to me.
If it happens, if he's traded, it's just going to be a fascinating thing to cover somebody like him. It's just the difference between him and Devin Booker, who Devin Booker gets involved in really kind of no off-court drama, but does have like a microscope on him and is criticized for like the most random stuff. Whereas Kevin Durant is just involved with like some of the most dramatic things that have happened in the NBA in the last 15 years. And the difference between those two guys is massive. And for us, going from covering one to maybe covering both is going to be an interesting experience if it does happen.
Let me ask you this. If the Suns actually managed to pull this off, in the superstar empowerment era that this is, where we talk all about player empowerment, but it's really only player empowerment for a dozen or a couple dozen guys in the league, right? The mid-level guys have no real control. When we talk about player empowerment, we're talking about the Kevin Durants of the league.
Jay Crowder couldn't force his way off the Suns, right?
Exactly. Jay Crowder has no extra influence than he would have had playing in the league in 1997. There's been no difference for a player like Jay Crowder.
Exactly.
It's about the Kevin Durants. When we talk about player empowerment, bringing a guy like that into your locker room, I'm not so worried about the players. Are you? And I know these are guys who have established relationships with Kevin Durant. As of now, there is no reason that there should be any feelings of animosity between them. That being said, if you're James Jones or if you're Monty Williams, I mean, Kevin Durant just asked for his coach and GM to be fired in order to leave open the possibility of reconciliation with Brooklyn. Are you at all sweating if you're Monty Williams bringing this guy in? Are you at all sweating if you're James Jones?
It's a big part of why he got a contract extension, I would imagine. I think Monty Williams is a big part of why Kevin Durant wants to play here, but I think you could also say on the flip side, he's one of the reasons Steve Nash, or probably the main reason Steve Nash was hired in Brooklyn. And, on this very podcast, Sam, when Steve Nash was hired, we covered it because he is a former Phoenix Sun. And we said that we weren't sure if this was a good idea for Steve Nash because if it went badly, he's going to take the blame and get fired. And look, he's taking the blame. Whether or not they fire him is sort of the next step. It doesn't seem like it's going to happen. And I think if you're Monty Williams, you could probably ride high with the confidence that it seems like he has an excellent relationship with Kevin Durant. And, for Steve Nash, he was a first-time coach coming into this situation.
Yeah,
that
I think
was impossible. Whereas I think there is a culture here. We have Devin Booker. He's the Rock. We have Monty Williams. You have James Jones. Everything in Brooklyn changed. They changed everything. They even traded Jared Allen,
right?
Their good center, and brought in a terrible one.
Right, and they changed it.
They bended too much.
Most importantly, they changed it all at the same time. KD, if he comes, it's again the mercenary thing. He's very much coming, just as he did to Golden State in 2016 or whatever year that was. 2016, 2017? It was 2016. He's very much the outsider. Monty Williams has an established track record of success with the Suns here, and you would like to think that basically the organization would have his back in a situation like that, whereas Steve Nash didn't have that necessary track record. Also, I'm not sure Steve Nash is a good, I'm not sure I would compare Steve Nash and Monty Williams just on the basis of
he
being
might be a bad coach. Yeah,
he might be a bad coach.
I think the situation is not the best way to judge it. But
certainly not to say
coach.
That the chaos in Brooklyn is Steve Nash's fault. I do not believe that. But yeah, I do think there's a difference between the two guys. Still, I guess I'm just saying, Monty just signed that extension. We still haven't gotten any details, by the way, about how many tangible years that extension is for. If it's for 2 more years, if it's for 3 more years. Regardless, Monty has several more years locked up. And if I'm in his position, I'm feeling a little bit better about that now. Because I know worst case scenario, if I'm getting thrown under the bus, at least I can still collect checks for a few more years.
Yeah, that's right. An unidentified number of years on that extension. Back to the point before this tangent. Just from the perspective of the Suns, you hear that Kevin Durant reiterated his trade demand, made it clear to the Nets he doesn't want to be there. That's a positive. You hear that there's a possibility he could stay. Joe Tsai tweets out that he wants Nash and Marks to stay with the Nets. That's a positive for the Suns. Beyond that, the Christian Winfield report, reporting that Kevin Durant wouldn't necessarily show up to camp and just cooperate with the Nets just because people think he loves basketball. By the way, another report about how people think Kevin Durant feels about something. But another positive as far as the Suns and their possibility of getting Kevin Durant. But there's another side of that, and that's that none of these guys are really reporting the Suns as a realistic trade partner for the Brooklyn Nets, which is fascinating for multiple reasons. But can we talk about Adrian Wojnarowski now?
Sure. Yeah. I'm turning it over to you at this point because I know you've got stuff to say.
I think that there has always been the suspicion by Suns fans that Woj was just the puppet for Sean Marks. And I think that what happened in the last day or two, for those who are listening to this podcast, most of you, has made it very, very, very clear. And this was outlined. I'll just give a shout out because I can't not do it, even though I don't really like him. Ethan Sherwood-Strauss wrote about this, and someone provided me the what it was, and I read it, and it was a fascinating piece. And
it's a glowing recommendation, by the way. Now, if you ever want to have him on the pod,
we're not going to have him on
no, we're not going to have him on the
pod. But he did. I think the thing about Ethan Sherwood-Strauss, if we're just being honest, is he kind of sucks. But he also works for the people in that his entire job now basically comes from people paying him directly, sort of like our Patreon.
He's alternative NBA commentary at this point, right, which means that he says a lot of shit that is off base and not, honestly, yes, if we're being honest, just not based in reality. 3,000-word rants about why NBA ratings are down because the league is too woke. Like there's a side of him that's just, but I understand
for certain places.
I understand why this particular column was attractive. Yes.
He also has the ability of writing things about Woj and Shams without it worrying about it impacting his job.
With no access at stake. Absolutely.
Exactly.
It's important.
And there's a plus to that. So that's why he was capable of doing what he did. But what he outlined, and this is what is interesting about the piece, was that Shams reported the story about the meeting in the morning on the day that it was reported. And then ESPN had about 12 shows that covered the NBA. None of them even mentioned the meeting even happened. As soon as Joe Tsai tweeted out that he supports Sean Marks, all of a sudden ESPN then writes about the meeting that happened. And the headline was, the Nets support their front office, essentially, of the story. It was not about the reiteration of the trade demand. It was not about Kevin Durant supposedly demanding that they be fired. It was now entirely about the support for Sean Marks. And what this means is that Woj, in his infinite power, will not even allow ESPN to report something that happened for fear of it pissing off his sources, which he does entirely, all of his work is done in support of those sources, to the extent that it impacts the coverage from all ESPN shows, not just what Woj does, which is just an insane thing that it happens. The extent to which we now fully understand that even though the Suns are not mentioned in any of these pieces, we see the chain of command here. And it sort of is Marks, Woj, and then ESPN, and that's essentially how it works. And to see that sort of painted out so obviously and so clearly in front of us is just kind of bizarre.
Yeah, it reeks. It really reeks of. To be honest, it is a little bit funny to me just because of how animated you were about it earlier today. That's why I'm laughing. But it does suck. It does suck, right? It reeks of access journalism at its absolute worst, and that's definitely not something we should be supporting in the industry. And it's particularly counterintuitive because why is Woj popular in the first place? What tangible value does he bring to ESPN's network, to their broadcasting? Is basically only that he's this, journalist with great sources who scoops Shams by 15 seconds and beats everyone else to the punch. But he can't even do that in this case because he is a slave to his source, in this case being Sean Marks. So yeah, it definitely sucks. In terms of how you relate it to Phoenix specifically, you were asking earlier about what can we make of this information coming out about specific team packages, because that's all there is to the rest of the story with KD from now on. And the answer to that, whether it's coming from Woj or whether it's coming from Shams, is basically nothing. Basically no information about specific team packages that are being assembled at this point is reliable, if you're a Suns fan at least, or honestly, if you're anyone. Part of the reason why the Suns may not be included in some of these discussions, and Shams, I did see, to his credit, he did address the Suns today. He did talk about them for maybe 30 or 60 seconds.
So they were far behind of the other options for the Nets.
Look, there's a legitimate argument to be had that if the Raptors still put Scotty Barnes out there, or if the Celtics put Jaylen Brown out there, yes, you can definitely you can convince me that those are better packages. That's one reason to leave the Suns behind.
Especially if you ignore what Kevin Durant wants, though, right? That's like a big part of it. You have to ignore that part.
Definitely. And that's where I think a lot of the frustration comes in. But yeah, I mean, it's tough, man. It's tough. It sucks.
It really does suck. And by the way, you mentioned what is his value to ESPN. I'm kind of convinced at this point the most value that Woj brings to ESPN is the fact that so many people have notifications on for his tweets, because Woj is not the most polished guy on TV. And you know, like you said, breaking something 15 seconds before somebody else, how valuable is that really? I'm not really sure. The NBA does sort of gamify that on Twitter, like NBA fans. They like to keep track of it, including us. But the notifications on the tweets, those probably push a lot of clicks, I imagine. That might be the biggest value that he has. But to see sort of how he works for people in real time, I thought was fascinating. And I think you're right. We can't really... Look, I don't know. I would say that after all of these reports came out, I've been less confident in Kevin Durant, significantly less than I was a month ago. This increased that confidence. I wouldn't say that I'm up high in the high percentages that he's definitely going to be on the Suns, but I would say after everything that came out here, and by the way, fully understanding how Sean Marks plays the game and how that reflects how the Suns don't, and how very clearly the Suns don't, and how if they did, maybe they would be pushed a little higher in the media talks, and how they think that does not impact how the trade actually goes down. I think that all of that combined, I think, increased my confidence that the Suns still have a chance in this race. But how do you feel? Did it affect you at all?
Well, like about the Suns' continued silence? The Suns continued...
Well, just your confidence in them being able to pull off a trade here.
Yeah, no, look, I still think they can pull off a trade. What was the screenshot you shared a couple hours ago? Was it Bobby Marks sharing a proposed trade package from Toronto of Anunoby, Gary Trent, and picks, essentially, right?
Four picks.
Wow.
And Thad Young.
Thad Young. Wow.
I know.
Don't get me too excited now. No, but it's like, look, Scotty Barnes is one thing. Again, I recognize at this point that there are a couple of trump cards that various other teams can play, and that's why you should not be at 99% confidence at this point on KD if you're a Suns fan. But
and this was labeled the most realistic Kevin Durant trade, by the way.
Was it?
By Bobby
Was that
Marks,
really
yes.
the context? Yeah, I mean that's kind of embarrassing. Yeah, I mean I absolutely believe that the Suns are still willing to put the Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, and however many picks package out there. Take it or leave it at that point. If there's a better offer, then so be it. But I do believe that offer is out there.
Yeah. And, there is some speculation that maybe James Jones is still not willing to include Mikal Bridges and just trying to force their hand. To me, if your package initially started with DeAndre Ayton and Cameron Johnson and now is Cameron Johnson and filler, I don't know if the Nets would do that. I think maybe they would just bring KD into the season and deal with a miserable player as long as possible until he's willing to play somewhere else other than Phoenix.
Yeah, I will admit.
You probably have to include Mikal.
Cam Johnson and fillers, it's a pretty miserable package.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not getting 100% value for KD if you're the Nets, no matter what leverage, no matter what box Joe Tsai's put you in. But then there's that. And that's a bleak outlook for the future of the organization if you can't even get a Mikal Bridges level player back. Yep,
I agree with that. I guess we'll see, because I think I mentioned this last week, the possibility that Joe Tsai was meeting with Kevin Durant to try and convince him to play with the Nets was also, I think, equally as possible that he was just trying to convince Kevin Durant to open up the other teams that he was willing to play for to make it easier for the Nets to trade him. And Durant needs to remain as steadfast as possible if you still have hope that he can play for the Phoenix Suns. And look, Durant is a weirdo. I'm not going to lie. It's possible that he is just going to insist on the Suns. It's also possible he's going to change his mind randomly one day. It's hard to figure him out, and it will be interesting to see what the conclusion of this is. Regardless of all of that, I do believe that because of this meeting and because of the obvious tension that was created with the supposed demand for two of the highest up people with the Brooklyn Nets to be fired, that we are closer to the end of this than we have been at any moment, and that it could happen any moment. I think it could happen tomorrow, and I wouldn't be entirely surprised whether he's traded to the Suns or somewhere else.
I pray to God. I pray to God that you are right. I am starting to feel like there is a football that is being held out for me, and then I keep missing the damn kick. But we will see. We're kind of saying the same thing about the end is coming soon. The end is coming soon every week. I definitely agree. It feels like we're turning the page on what could be the final chapter here. Let's see where it goes.
Steph Curry was almost a Phoenix Suns player. McDonough had plans to pair up Carmelo Anthony and LeBron James. And we'll see if Kevin Durant is in the long line of almost Suns players or if he ends up on the Suns, hopefully very soon. Let's take a quick break, and we have some more rumors to talk about, which is kind of interesting. We'll be back in just a second. All right, Sam, a few other things to talk about here. The first one is an interesting one. I don't know if you could classify this as a rumor or just a couple people speculating on what the Suns could do, but there has been some sort of connection made between reporters with the Suns and Kemba Walker, who is a possible player to be bought out that could be available as a free agent. And this is the first that we've heard of that, and you and I have yet to mention him as a possibility for the Suns. What do you think?
Finally, the third All-Star that we've been looking for all along, Kemba Walker, is technically a man who has made All-Star teams before. Yeah, do you want my real opinion? There's a reason we haven't brought Kemba up before. But recently, I mean, he's not very good.
That reason. Couldn't even play for the Knicks.
Let's be honest. Got cut by the Knicks about 30 games in to last season. That was not a great sign, especially given that team did not have a great slate of point guards. They did have young point guards, I will point out, that they were trying to develop, and so they needed to make room for. But even so, not a great sign. What can we say about Kemba? I mean, I guess where we start here is that this entire quote-unquote rumor is based on speculation in an article that we saw, supposedly from an Eastern Conference executive saying that Phoenix basically, it's not a secret. Phoenix is a team that still needs point guard help. They still need guard depth. As of now, their point guard depth is, after Chris Paul, it's Cam Payne, and then Elfrid Payton is not coming back, so then it's Dwayne Washington, who's not really a point guard, maybe, but their two-way contract player that they just got. So all in all, unless you want to play like Landry Shamet there, or just like do point book or something weird, not a lot of point guard depth for the Suns right now, and not a whole lot of reasons to feel particularly confident, especially with how Cam Payne just fizzled out in the playoffs. This Eastern Conference executive essentially speculating the Suns should be a team, Kemba will be looking for playoff teams or contenders he could play for. Yeah. He should go to Phoenix. I believe the article even said, even if it's just a non-guaranteed contract, you can always cut him by January, but that's a team that he could go to. And so that's sort of the background context that we're working on. There are no official engagements between the Suns front office and Kemba Walker as far as we know. We're just dealing with speculation. I will say, just based on that description of the idea, the Suns have an open roster spot. Mm-hmm. I don't mind it because I do recognize, we've been saying literally for weeks, that the Suns, as awesome as the KD stuff is, sort of to the side of it all, the Suns really need a guard. They really still need a guard. And I do think we talked for 20 minutes about Dwayne Washington Jr. last week. I do think he's intriguing in some ways. At the end of the day, he's a two-way contract. He's capped in how much official time he can spend with the big league club or with the club at all.
Can't play in the playoffs.
Can't play in the playoffs unless the Suns would end up cutting someone else. Or, if they left that 15th roster spot open and then gifted it to him at some point, obviously that's a possibility. But the point is, they could use a guy with a little bit more experience, and say what you will about Kemba, and I think there are a lot of negatives we could go into. He does have experience. He is particularly good at a couple things that I think the Suns are still missing. But, what do you think of Kemba Walker as a player at this point?
He's pretty bad. He's really incapable of guarding. He doesn't play a lot of games due to injury, and his any of the separation that he was able to create early in his career, most of that's gone. So it is sort of one of those things where it's like, could he have like a revival season where all of a sudden he plays better? And I think for guys his size and the trajectory of their careers, it doesn't seem very likely. You know, when you put it through the lens of a non-guaranteed spot that could be cut later, then I think you can say, okay, yeah, then, you know, if you need that roster spot, like the Suns appear to want to keep this roster spot open for a while just to see what happens in the future. And then they have that taxpayer mid-level exception. If people get bought out, they have the ability of paying more than other teams to fill that roster spot and maybe get a good player later in the season, not necessarily, you know, rush to fill it with one of the worst free agent classes left right now. So yeah, from that perspective, I get it. From a human perspective, signing someone like Kemba Walker with the intention of cutting him later seems kind of shitty. I'll be honest.
I don't think it seems shitty. He'd rather have a contract than not have a contract at this point. If his only option is a non-guaranteed 1-year veteran minimum deal with a team that's very much supposedly at least going to be in the conversation for an NBA championship, I think. Mm-hmm. I think he'd rather play.
And if he's good, you know, the Suns can still make 2-for-1 trades.
Let me put it this way:
the team in the future,
the Suns come to you and say, "Hey, play for us. You'll be our." And I don't really know if this is going to be true, so I don't know if they would make this promise. But what if they say, hey, you'll be our day one backup point guard? We'll give you the spot for the backup point guard from day one over campaign. We reserve the right to cut you after 25, 30 games if it's not working out, and we know we can fall back on campaign. But we'll give you that spot. Versus some other team, you know, I don't know, Orlando or Oklahoma City, some bad team comes to him and says, hey, here's a 1-year deal. We need someone to fill out 15 minutes. Which one do you think he'd rather take? I think he would rather take the Sun spot pretty easily.
Yeah, well, yeah. I think from his perspective, it makes perfect sense. You know, I do think it's funny that in the article written about Kemba Walker, it was mentioned the idea that Chris Paul's older and maybe Kemba Walker could fill in for him. And I'm like, I look at their games played. Well, like in the past, Chris Paul is a lot more likely to play even at this point of their careers than Kemba Walker. Kemba Walker's constantly injured, incapable of playing, and you know has even been cut for just being bad.
All right, like, let me defend him a little bit because I did come prepared with some stats.
Okay,
Kemba per 36 last year in the. I don't know how many games he played exactly last year. Let me pull it up. He played 37 games. He started all 37 games that he played last year, 25.6 minutes. Maybe there's an argument in there that he'd look better against second unit players than against starters, by the way. I do think
okay. Yeah,
that's
fair.
definitely something you can say. So he started 37 games last year and was cut. He averaged 16 points and 5 assists per 36 minutes on 54% true shooting, just slightly below league average.
Right. That's better than campaign at this point.
But better than campaign was last year. Very low turnover numbers. Say what you will about Kemba. He is not the NBA's best playmaker by any stretch of the imagination, but he's always taken very good care of the ball. He's never, ever, ever been a high turnover guy. That's been something very consistent throughout his career. He's got incredible ball handling skills. He shot 35% on pull-up threes, which, again, pull-up three point percentages you expect to be lower than catch and shoot 3-point percentages. That's pretty good. And he took more importantly, he took a lot of pull-up threes. B-Ball Index's data gave him an A+ rating for overall 3-point shot creation.
And he kind of has to do that, by the way, right? Because he can't get the separation that he used to be able to get.
Well, exactly. I mean, look, I'm not going to hide the negatives. The negatives are that Kemba Walker he never could really finish to begin with. He's always been undersized, and now he definitely can't finish. And so what it leaves him with is basically he's got to be a 3-point shot creator and to a little bit of an extent a playmaker, but mostly a 3-point shot creator. He's a great 3-point shot creator, though, still, at least according to that data. And the Suns need that. Like, I don't think you can sit here and scoff at the idea of a guy who's an A+ rating for 3-point shot creation as if the Suns don't need that. You can definitely say, well, he can't guard a traffic cone and he can't finish, so is it really worth it?
And the defense is real bad, It's really
non-guaranteed 1-year contract. All I'm saying for a guy who you know can light it up for 20 or 25 points sometimes, I don't. You know, you have a lot of Suns fans out here still asking us week to week whenever we do a mailbag, for instance, about Jordan Clarkson. I don't think the Suns are going to go after Jordan Clarkson. I think Dwayne Washington, I said this last week, and I'll say it again, I think Dwayne Washington was their Jordan Clarkson. They want to get a guy like that without giving up real assets for it. An alternative path to doing that, getting another quasi-Jordan Clarkson, another Jordan Clarkson light type, who's cheaper and doesn't cost any real assets, would be using your last roster spot. And worse, but that's how it works. You're kicking the tires on a reclamation project, but I think that's maybe what Kemba Walker would be.
I think it's fair from that perspective. I just think when you watch him play, he just can't move anymore. And that, I think, is the most worrisome thing, because regardless of some of the stats that you read out there, I just worry about his ability to continue to play at any sort of high level against good teams.
Yeah, well,
and look, maybe you don't need him to. I mean, from that perspective, maybe you just don't need him to, man. And that he's just sort of the end of the bench guy that can come in and step in if Chris Paul's out or if Campaign's out.
Yeah,
and play minutes to fill that spot.
You remember what Devontae Graham looked like against the Suns in the first round of the playoffs? I mean, it's kind of that, right? Like,
I see that. Okay.
Well, I mean, are you looking at that in a positive light? Because for me, that was basically Devontae Graham was a non-factor in that series. Maybe he had one good game, I can't remember, but
I think one.
He went from being a guy who was okay, he'll give us 20 minutes per game in the regular season, to okay, we can't get away with playing him more than 7 minutes in this series because he really comes in, chucks up a few threes, and if a couple of them go in, great. But he's not doing anything else on the basketball floor, and frankly, I think that's more or less what Kemba Walker would be as well. I said I wouldn't hide the negatives, so I will point out this is why he was cut. The Knicks were 11.5 points per 100 possessions worse with Kemba Walker on the floor in the minutes he played last season.
Yeah,
that's bad. It's really bad.
It's kind of some of the worst numbers you can look at for the minutes he played.
There's not much sugarcoating that, I don't think. Again, that was against starters. Maybe it's different against bench players.
I think there's not a lot of downside if it's made very clear to him that it's almost like a tryout to see if it works out in the first half of the season with a non-guaranteed contract where they can continue to make a roster spot later if guys do get bought out. And if that's very clear to him, I just don't want to be a team that signs a guy and then cuts him because he sucks. I think that
why
sucks.
Not? Why not? That's a weird like I'm not used to taking a stance like that. Like that's the name of the game, man. You give guys try. Well, you have an open roster spot, so you give these guys a tryout. They know how it works. They know it's a business. You know, like
but I also think that the Suns have been very, very great in the relationships that they've had with players so far in the James Jones era compared to what we've dealt with in the past. And I think making the right moves to make sure that players understand that the Suns are, like a legitimate place to give you an actual chance is good. And that means just the right communication can still do it. I'm not saying that it's impossible.
Yeah.
It just sucks because I think that it working out with Kemba Walker, the chances are slim. And if it does, I think you get a potential good player on cheap who can't play in the playoffs still.
I think it's very low risk. I don't know. What are the odds that Kemba Walker, who, as far as I know, is not a player who has ever really blown up at anyone, is a player who would
you're right.
some devastating effect to the locker room because he shows 100%. Up, he's a professional, he does his role for 30 games, and if he sucks, I really think you can cut him and it wouldn't be the end of the world. Most importantly, I like the idea of giving Campaign some competition because right now, I'm not comfortable with the idea of Campaign sitting there, and I don't really think he's thinking this, but kind of just sitting there getting complacent because he's looking around and he's like, I'm the backup point guard because no one else is here. I like the idea of Campaign being forced to improve his game and really redeem himself from where he was last season, which was not very good. So if Kemba is going to be kind of the thing to get the gears turning for him and give him a kick in the rear, I'm all for it.
Yeah. I could be talked into it. It wouldn't surprise me if Dwayne Washington Jr. was just better than him.
Yeah, I would. That wouldn't shock me.
That just wouldn't surprise me. And that's a two-way player. So that's kind of where I'm at with my confidence in Kemba Walker and what he could be for the Suns. Let's talk about something else that I think you and I might have. I don't know. I'm interested to hear your perspective on this. ESPN did what they do every year, which is kind of try to predict the Western Conference. And in doing that, they basically predicted contenders, non-contenders, and then tried to predict essentially 1 through 8, or at least 1 through 6 in the Western Conference. And with all of their experts, they did do everyone. Okay,
they did place a win total on everyone, technically, yeah.
Okay. With all of those experts, they predicted that the Phoenix Suns would be number 1 in the Western Conference. This is, of course, before any sort of idea of a Kevin Durant trade. I guess there's a possibility they know a little more than they're letting on. But right now, they're predicting the Suns go 56-26, and that is enough to be number 1 in the Western Conference, which with this kind of bloodbath that it could be next year, maybe it is enough. how do you feel about the Suns being predicted to be number one in the Western Conference by the experts at ESPN?
I do think this was interesting, and I think, normally we don't cover this type of stuff heavily, but I think the reason I wanted to do it is kind of, there is this impression that, not just Suns fans, there's this impression that every local fan base has of, we never get any respect from the national media. And coming off the type of loss that the Suns had in the playoffs, I think to get this respect from the national media to say, hey, we still think you're the number one regular season team in the Western Conference. At least we're predicting you to win 56 games, and that's the best. We'll have to wait and see what the Vegas numbers say when those come out. I think it's notable, though. I really do think it's notable, and I think it's something that we should talk about. How do I feel about, and also just quickly to address, what you said about if they know anything about KD. I don't think they know anything about KD. I think this is entirely their prediction based on who the Phoenix Suns currently are. So Devin Booker, Chris Paul, DeAndre Ayton, Mikal Bridges, etc.
The same team as last year outside of JaVale McGee.
Literally
right?
the same team as last year. Just replace JaVale McGee.
In their top 8-9 players, yeah.
Just replace JaVale McGee with Dario Saric / Bismack Biyombo, I guess. And is there anyone else?
Replace Jay Crowder with just angrier Jay Crowder.
If the Suns went in with the same roster as of today, would they have anyone new in their top 8 or 9?
No, not really.
No, right? No. Not expecting.
I mean,
not Damian
Torrey
Lee,
Craig would be there the
Josh
whole season,
Koji,
right?
Torrey Craig would be there the entire season, but yeah, it's the same team. So yeah, I mean, really just basically
hashtag continuity.
Really hashtag continuity, and so I guess where we start here. Look, this is the thing, and this is the narrative that the Suns now have to battle back from the entire season. A number one conference slot projection is not necessarily the show of faith that you want it to be. It's not the endorsement for playoff basketball that you want it to be. And that's still the issue here, is what if the Suns have boxed themselves into the reputation of essentially being the new Utah Jazz of, we know they're going to be good.
Right.
We just also know they're not going to do anything. So that's what you're up against. You have to battle against that. Even all that aside, I think 56 wins is pretty damn generous as a projection for just where the Suns are right now. And the reason I say that is really only because of Chris Paul. I am just at the point where I'm very nervous about Chris Paul going forward. And yes, I do believe that there is some unscratched potential on guys like Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson and DeAndre and yada yada go down the line.
Devin Booker a little bit too, yeah.
Yeah, but even when talking about the regular season, we are talking about a Western Conference, a slate of teams in the Western Conference that overall is going to be tougher with, and I know people meme the hell out of these teams, but with somewhat of a resurgence in health, at least for the Denver Nuggets and for the Los Angeles Clippers. The Rudy Gobert trade making Minnesota more competitive. New Orleans.
The Grizzlies win a ton of regular season games.
The Grizzlies could win a ton of regular season games. Golden State is a team that I think isn't going to take the regular season seriously, but will still find a way to win 50-plus games. New Orleans is a team where if they get... I think they're super underrated here, by the way. They were ranked 8th in the Western Conference here by the panelists, but more specifically, they were given a 43-win pick here, which I think is insane based on the New Orleans Pelicans team without Zion Williamson that we faced in the first round. So I think they're going to be much better than expected. And granted, there are going to be teams that drop too. They have the Utah Jazz dropping by like 25, 30 games, So like there are teams that they expected to get worse.
Right.
It's just,
the Mavericks are worse too, right?
It's gonna, and I mean, I think the Mavericks are about
maybe
the same.
Not in win prediction. They might be the same, but like they're definitely worse.
Yeah, I think the Mavs could be one of those teams that wins upper 40 games, but yeah, they're probably. I don't have a ton of faith in them come playoff time. My overall point being, if the Suns get KD, if the Suns get KD, it's a little bit interesting too, because if the Suns get KD,
don't care if they're the 1 seed.
They really might not take the regular season seriously either. So let's just go with the situation where the Suns don't get KD and they're just this team.
Run it back.
Yeah, they could win a lot of games. I mean, they could win. Win 55 games in the regular season for sure, man. It's just you just still have the same issue with Chris Paul, and I guess that's kind of what's frustrating.
I think,
but that's more of a playoff issue. If you want to convince me that, that's fine.
You and I have been pretty clear that we are anti running it back just in general, and it's not to say that I think the Suns would just be bad. Because they wouldn't. They would be good. They would be really good. I just think that running it back does not solve any of the playoff issues that they're going to continually run into year after year without making some sort of change at the top end and adding more top end talent. And like being the number 1 seed, yeah, I think they definitely could do that. And I'll be honest, my fear lies more with somebody like Cam Payne than Chris Paul. Because Chris Paul, he might miss some games. The Suns are pretty good when he missed games last year. But I think he'll play most of the season, and I think he'll still be really good in the regular season. I worry more about Chris Paul in the playoffs, and during the regular season, I worry more about Cameron Payne, weirdly, and just having nothing off the bench. And I think the Suns might have to make a change at some point during the regular season if they want to do that. And the Suns still, I think what's interesting about the Suns is if they don't pull off a Kevin Durant trade, they still have a ton of assets, and those assets now will include, going forward, a DeAndre Ayton, who will be signed for many years as well. Like, you know, they have assets to potentially make a trade mid-season or going forward in the future, and that makes them an enticing team going forward.
You know,
but yet just running it back, it's not regular season. I think they definitely could be the number 1 seed.
You know what this year kind of reminds me of at first glance is there was a year, I guess, when the Suns last made, or not when the Suns last made, before the Booker era. The last time Steve Nash made the Western Conference Finals, 2010.
2010.
I should have just started by saying 2010. There was, I distinctly remember that year because the Western Conference was so weird. I mean, throughout the late 2000s, the Western Conference was incredibly strong. But this year in particular, what I remember about it was every single team in the Western Conference in the playoffs, seeded 1 through 8, won 50 games. None of them were dominant the way you expect a number 1 seed to be. If I recall correctly, the Suns finished the 3rd seed because they played Portland in the first round. The Suns finished the 3rd seed that year. They won 54 games. Portland, as the 6th seed, won like maybe 50 or 51, and then there were a couple teams almost tied with them in 7 and 8. But no team won more than like 56, 57 games. There was no 60 win, 62 win, 64 win like the Suns last year contender. And just at first glance, I think you look at the Western Conference slate this year and you can clearly see maybe teams that, in the playoffs, I would rank this team over that team because of reasons X, Y, and Z. Just stacking it up by wins, though, I could see there being 6 or 7, maybe even 8, although I'd have to really think about it, 50 or almost 50 win teams that are kind of just right there. And like, could the Suns finish on top of all of them and be the first seed with 55, 56 wins? Yeah, I suppose I could see that. But also, like, could Minnesota shock everyone and be the first seed? Could New Orleans get a full healthy season out of Zion and be the first seed? Like, I do feel like the possibilities are kind of endless this year with all that. And that's not to mention the more obvious ones, like what if Golden State is just the best, or what if the Clippers are just the best, or Memphis, right? So there's a lot of
I do think someone's going to have a disaster season. Like, someone's going to miss the playoffs that they don't expect. Hopefully it's the Lakers again, right? And that's probably the most likely one. But at this point, our expectations for them are very low, including on this list. But like, out of the top 6, Phoenix Suns, this is just what ESPN had. Phoenix Suns, Golden State Warriors, Denver Nuggets, Memphis Grizzlies, LA Clippers, Dallas Mavericks. And the Dallas Mavericks are the lowest one and have 49 wins on this list.
Yeah.
One of these teams is probably not going to be in the top 6. And then the chances that it could be the Suns out of one of those teams, it is possible. As totally possible as the rest of these teams, just because of how much of the offense rests on Chris Paul's shoulders and the fact that, you know, running it back doesn't always work, as we saw with the Utah Jazz. Year after year, if you fail in the playoffs, sometimes the players are no longer happy. Sometimes the coach's words don't carry as much weight with the same locker room anymore. That type of thing is still possible for the Suns. I'm not saying it will happen, but I do think that them winning a ton of games is still just as possible. Like, that's definitely something that could happen. This is 8 wins less, by the way, than last year.
Well, and I think that's part of what's so crazy about it. I mean, here's the thing. The Suns were like the best clutch team ever last year. One of the best clutch teams ever. They did not lose clutch games. If they had it and it was close in the fourth quarter, they won every time. Now, I really, really want to believe that there is no regression there and that they continue to just dominate in the clutch and run their shit and that they just continuity prevails through. And I think they will continue to be a good clutch team. But, you know, a couple of extra losses that you lose on heartbreaking game winners or games that you should have won but you didn't, I could see stuff like that happening this year just because it tends to happen. Not to mention like injury luck and stuff like that. So there's all sorts of things that could happen. By the way, teams 7 and 8, just because you didn't mention them, they had Minnesota 7 and they were also in the upper 40s. And then where it tanks, according to them, is New Orleans 8. That's where they only had them winning 43 games, which again I think is off base. Like for me, I actually agree with the top 8 ranking. I don't know if I put it in exactly that order, but I agree with the 8 teams they decided on. I would also leave the Lakers out. They have the Lakers at 9th. Yeah, but I just think New Orleans is better than 43 wins, and I think you could take some. I think you could take some wins away from other teams here. Like they have Denver winning 53. I don't know if Denver's a 53-win team without MPJ, like just on the backs of Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic. Again, I don't know if they're that good.
Or even just with MPJ coming back from a back injury, if he does play, what's it going to look like? And even Jamal Murray. I think Jamal Murray would probably be fine. Like players come back from ACL tears pretty well now. I would say that's pretty normal. But yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see them reintegrated. But like the Suns could be experimenting as well. Like, right? What if Cam Johnson's starting? What if that doesn't work quite as well as we thought at first? And what if that takes some time to get used to defensively and things have to change? I think stuff like that could affect it as well.
The Suns' version of an experiment, though, if that's what happens, is so much less interesting. or so much less, not interesting. That's not necessarily the word to use, but so much less risky than any other experiment that these other teams are really dealing with, because most, except with a couple of exceptions, right? Like
there's one thing.
Golden State's the same, but most of these teams have just had more turnover and far more turnover.
There's one thing with the Suns that maybe won't be an issue, but DeAndre Ayton signed a contract to play somewhere else and now is playing on the Suns. And I don't anticipate that being a problem, but if it's like a little bit of a problem, that could have somewhat of an impact. I hope it's not. But that did happen. And look, it's not, the cards aren't lining up to guarantee that the Suns are the number 1 seed. That in any way, like that's not going to happen. Like if once the over-unders are released, if it's 56 wins, I'm not going to hammer the over immediately. Like that's not like I did last year. I did immediately. Like when the over-unders were released and the Suns were at like 52 wins or whatever, that was an obvious one. I think we all kind of thought that would be an over, and it ended up being an over. But yeah, I guess it's a tough situation, not the easiest one to predict. But I think when we talk about, you and I talk about not being fans of running it back, it's entirely about the playoffs. And I think these regular season things, it's just, as you see when you make the finals and when you fail in the second round, it's easy to focus a little bit more on the playoffs because the game does change and it's different, and you have to have different ways of being flexible and adaptable in the playoffs than the regular season.
It's really all it's about. Got to be looking.
You got anything else on that?
Nah, got to be looking out for the little minute stuff, I guess. It's kind of just hard to watch for in the regular season. If the playoffs shook out this way, I'm looking at the 1 through 8 ranking right now, this would be a pretty cool playoffs. Actually, the Suns would play New Orleans again in the first round.
Well, I mean, there's, who's, because the 9th is the Lakers. Who's the 10th?
Oh, right. There's the whole play-in.
Yeah.
I don't have Beyond 9 in front of me.
Okay. So it could be someone else, I guess. The Kings might be there? Because it's not Utah, I'm guessing.
10, they have Portland with a projection of 35 wins. So that's the other thing. I could see Portland being horrible this year. Yeah. So I don't really know if they're a 35 win. Or I could see them, maybe clawing their way back to 500. I guess anything could happen. So,
even 500 might be.
I don't know, man. And
be
they have OKC at 25 wins. Is this the year they get? On the one hand, I'm frustrated at OKC for not putting a real team around, like putting the right veterans around Shea. But on the other hand, maybe they're young. Maybe their youth is just good enough, and they win 40 games in spite of that. I don't know. Anything could happen. So.
Maybe the Suns trade for Kevin Durant at some point, and that changes how we feel.
But see, the thing is, if the Suns trade for Kevin Durant, they could finish in the 6th seed, like 51-31, and we'd feel more confident in the playoffs. And that is what is so goddamn hard about talking about and analyzing NBA basketball.
Exactly. And that's all we got this week. Thank you guys for listening. Sorry about the Patreon. No Patreon episode last week. I ended up doing a little more traveling, and it was a little bit harder than I anticipated it being to record. Hopefully we'll be back with another Patreon episode in the next few days. We appreciate you guys. And of course, if there's any big news, we are on call. So we will be ready to talk about everything. Thank you guys.
If if we don't get KD, we gotta just scrub every episode from the podcast archives for the summer. Just take this stretch of 10 episodes and delete them all so that no one can ever find them.